This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. This Week in Virology, episode number 321, recorded on January 23rd, 2015. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you are listening to TWiV, the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today here in the TWiV studio, Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
How are you, Dickson?
I'm feeling great.
I shouldn't ask how you are, right? It's kind of
I give you the same answer every time.
No, but I see you all day, and then I say, how
true.
are you? It's
This
kind
is
of
true.
weird. I guess it's just for the audience, right?
Yeah, that would be fair.
Would you say we have a nice day today here?
It is not bad. There's no wind.
Yeah.
The temperature is in the middle 30s, and the sun has been shining most of the day.
It's 3 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
It's been chilly this week, though.
It's
I
winter.
suppose it is winter.
Yeah, there's no avoiding that.
Also joining us today from Western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here.
How's it going out there?
Oh, not too badly. It's by the standards of the past few weeks, it's downright balmy. It's 4 Celsius. I mean, it broke freezing. I'm practically in shorts and T-shirts here.
Look
Wow.
at that.
Well, not really, but
Yeah, metaphorically.
yes.
Also joining us today from southeastern Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody. It's a sunny day. We don't get those that often in the winter, so it's nice.
It's usually cloudy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's 31 Fahrenheit, -1 Celsius.
You have snow on the ground, right?
Oh, yes.
Hey, Dixon, you going to cough the whole time?
It is the flu season after all, but no, I won't.
Want a glass of water?
I'm not going to cough all it.
Then go get it. I'm not going to get it for you. Do I look like you're...
Do you want a glass of water? Then go get it. I love that.
Yeah, I was waiting. You set yourself up. We have a special guest today who is no stranger to TWiV. He's a professor over at Boston University, Paul Duprex. Welcome
Hello.
back. How are you?
I am very well. I am sitting in my office in Needle, which you're familiar with, of course.
Ah, the needle. How is the needle?
Things are moving in a good direction. I personally, if we start with me, I finished my stage 2 training and now I'm in mentoring mode. So I have a young postdoc who is looking after me as I move forward in the training process. Mm-hmm. And CDC have been here. They've carried out a first inspection, and we're really hoping at some point this year that things will really move. So we've BSL-2 stuff. My lab is now in the building. BSL-3 is now functional, and it's only the icing on the cake, 4 to get us open completely. So that'll be great.
So the city of Cambridge has given up. Is that the idea?
Well, Cambridge are having a debate about other parts of BSL-4 and recombinant DNA, but remember that this is a Boston issue, so it's Boston City Council that deal with us.
Got it.
Well, listeners should remember Paul from Threading the Needle, which, by the way, Paul has got something like 80,000 views now.
Nice.
On YouTube and Vimeo, so people like it. And if you want to find out about the needle and what it is, go check it out. You can just search.
And we also had Paul on the Boston TWiV party.
We did, which was just last year.
Yeah.
So now we'll have you back, Paul, not to talk about your work, but to talk about an issue that we've been dancing around for a while, and with which you have some experience. And this is, of course, the current pause in certain types of research. And I wanted to just talk about how we got there and what's going on. There have been a number of publications, many of them in MBio. They've sort of become the forum. There's been a public meeting at the NSABB that you, Paul, participated in. There was also a meeting at the National Academy of Sciences, which you went to, Paul, so I thought that you could help comment on this. And, of course, Paul and I, for all disclosure, founded the scientistforscience.com site to provide an alternative voice here. So I thought we would get you on to do that. So my idea here is I've gone through a number of these papers. I'm just going to comment on them, and everyone can jump in and give us their thoughts, and we'll eventually get to the end. Now, all of this, so currently we have a pause on research on, which is essentially giving new properties to influenza virus, and specifically its transmission, although it's called gain of function, which we'll get into in a moment. This all really began with the H5N1 transmission studies that we talked about several years ago from Fouchier and Kawaoka, where they adapted H5N1 influenza virus to transmit by aerosol among ferrets. There was a firestorm of protest. The NSABB got involved. Eventually the work was published, and we documented all of that here on TWiV. But now the current pause, I think, is a direct result of that. And if you trace what happened shortly after the H5N, so there was a pause on H5N1 transmission research as a consequence of that whole controversy. That was lifted, and then shortly afterwards, a number of individuals started weighing in. And the two, in my mind, who have weighed in the most and these individuals are no strangers to TWiV listeners: Simon Wayne Hobson and Mark Lipsitch. And they both have written a number of articles. Lipsitch, a few articles here and there, which I blogged about and we've talked about on TWiV. Most prominently, he had an editorial in the New York Times last year, and he wrote a paper in PLOS Medicine, which we covered in TWiV 287. And this was an article. It's got a very strange title. It's called Ethical Alternatives to Experiments with Novel Potential Pandemic Pathogens. Paul and I were just discussing that the title implies that the current experiments are not ethical, which is really inappropriate. Don't you think, Paul?
Yeah, it's difficult. We come on to language later on, and the use of language and how careful we have to be, because in any debate, of course, people will disagree. But I always think that it's very important to try and listen and learn and diffuse people's concerns, and not up the rhetoric to a point where we use language to help our points along. And in doing that, we end up in a situation where people who know the discipline can just about follow what's going on, but people outside the discipline and people outside science, who we have a significant amount of responsibility to communicate clearly to, just get lost. And I don't think that that's a good thing. So I think it's beholden on us all to try and be very careful in how we use language in anything that we write.
Having written a textbook with Jane Flint, I'm really careful about what I write and say. So I hope I'm not guilty of that.
Well, it's always
would you say you're careful about how you express yourself?
Yes, that's right. I was at Princeton last week working on the book, and I put a picture of us working over on Facebook, and someone wrote, "I hear a lot of proteins expressing." But we digress. So that was, we covered that paper in TWiV 287, so won't spend any time on that. Wayne Hobson has published a number of articles. One of them he published in March of 2013 in Nature. It was called H5N1 Viral Engineering Dangers Will Not Go Away. And he, in general, in this article, questions the use of ferrets in studying H5 transmission. He says we're not going to learn very much about this, and all these have been allowed to proceed without any discourse. So he said we need to pause in this research until a thorough discussion of the issues and the dangers is done. And I think that's really where all of the idea of a pause begins.
And I just want to throw in kind of a tangent here, that this whole debate from the beginning, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but it's kind of echoed in my mind with really strong similarities to a debate that came out in about, I think, 2008 regarding a physics experiment called the Large Hadron Collider, which you've probably heard of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And there was this. I think most people have probably forgotten about this now, but there were some physicists who expressed concern that building this collider and doing these experiments could create some kind of miniature black hole or particle that could destroy the entire universe.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Anybody remember this?
I do, sure.
I do.
And the arguments that were put forward in that were strikingly similar to a lot of the arguments that have been put forward repeatedly in this gain of function debate. You can't prove that it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
What are the benefits, and will they outweigh destruction of the universe? And the entire nature of the rhetoric around that followed a very, very similar pattern. And, of course, the collider was built, and I don't know, maybe we're all in a parallel universe because we destroyed the first one. But in any case, we're still able to have TWiV, so I don't think much harm was done. Yeah. But even to the point that there were, at finer grain levels, there was discussion like a lot of the physics community was saying, well, these phenomena occur routinely throughout the universe and it hasn't destroyed it.
Right.
Which is very similar to something that we're going to be talking about with these pathogens. So I just wanted to throw in that historical reference that this general category of debate is not new.
Well, we have a paper coming up in a few moments which talks about the use of the apocalypse in these kinds of arguments, and people have been using catastrophic outcomes to discuss this for years, and it doesn't have a lot of value. Wayne Hobson published a series of papers questioning the value of this. I think in later in the year, there had been a letter from Ron Fouché and other influenza virologists discussing a series of gain-of-function experiments on H7N9 influenza virus that they wanted to do. And Wayne Hobson wrote a letter in response where he said, this is unbelievable. These scientists are proposing all these experiments. They are of no value, and they also say that gain-of-function is part of the scientific lexicon, which isn't true. And if you read his response, he's very angry. So, Fouché and Kawaoka write pretty measured pieces, and then Wayne Hobson comes out with this incredible anger, and I understand that he's passionate about it, but I don't think that helps your case. He also criticizes the use of the word gain of function, which we'll get to. But by the time you get through all of Wayne Hobson's articles, it's clear that he's focused on influenza transmission experiments. He then cites this interesting paper, which we didn't do at all on TWiV. This is a paper from Dan Perez's lab, where they take an H7N1 influenza virus, which is not considered to be a threat to humans, but they passed it through ferrets until it became aerosol transmitted. And Wayne Hobson writes an opinion on this experiment. This was published in the Journal of Virology, and it was really argued. The editors actually ended up writing a piece in the journal saying why they published this article, and Wayne Hobson has a reply saying this is a terrible experiment to publish. And then he says, look, we passed this virus in ferrets, it became aerosol transmissible, and there was no loss of virulence in ferrets. And he makes a big deal of this because, we're always saying gain of function, loss of something else. And the H5N1 experiments, they gained transmissibility by aerosol in ferrets and they lost virulence. But he says, look, here's a case where it doesn't lose virulence. Well, I've looked at that paper, and, the data for not losing virulence are not very convincing, in fact. And I think more experiments really need to be done to address that. So I think he's picking up on a weak point of that paper and making a big deal out of it. At this point, pretty much, I think the Cambridge Working Group was founded, which Mark Lipsitch and people who supported his view signed on to. And so Paul and I founded Scientists for Science, and we have quite a few people there who have signed on. And we have a statement saying that we believe that this kind of work needs to be done, and so forth. Around this time, there was also a really nice article in MBio by Arturo Casadeval, Howard, and Mike Imperiali. It's called An Epistemological Perspective on the Value of Gain-of-Function Experiments Involving Pathogens with Pandemic Potential. And I did have to look up epistemological when the paper came out.
So did I.
Yeah. I said I had to know that when I was an undergrad, but what was it again?
Right.
Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that examines the nature of knowledge, its presuppositions and foundations, its extent and validity. Most scientists and microbiologists in particular practice their art within specialized areas that include a set of normative standards that influence the pursuit and acceptance of knowledge, and such standards are a major focus of epistemological research within the philosophy of science. So that's from the paper. So they basically go on in this paper to discuss what are the normative standards in the field of microbiology. And one of the statements they make is that if you look at microbiology over the past 150 years, it's clear that gain-of-function experiments are very powerful because they can give direct information on cause and effect relationships. So they discuss this extensively throughout the paper. It's really worth reading. Then they move on to the issue of risk-benefit calculations, and this has always been part of the debate. How much risk is in this experiment? What's the benefit that we expect to get from it, and how can we balance the two? So they say the broader benefit of gain-of-function experiments has been more difficult to evaluate, given that the uses of scientific findings are not often immediately apparent. However, a powerful argument can be made for the value of GOF experiments because they yield information that is consistent with the normative standards of the field of micro and infectious diseases, and as such they provide information that is immediately accessible and interpretable. We all think that some risks are reasonable for the gain that comes from scientific progress. Otherwise, why would scientists sometimes put themselves at risk to do a dangerous experiment? They give a number of examples of this, including the collider and nuclear research and so forth. They say we strongly argue against arbitrary abandonment of gain-of-function research, since this would deprive these fields of a very important experimental tool. Instead, we suggest refocusing the discussion to articulate the type of knowledge that is needed to push these fields forward and enhance the safety of these experiments. The point is that when one does a risk-benefit analysis of this issue, the epistemic gain from gain-of-function experiments should be included in the bookkeeping. If one does that, the benefits of gain-of-function experiments are potentially so great as to warrant our risking more than we otherwise might. So I think missing from the opponents of this kind of work is what we would learn. And they don't ever point out what we would learn. They just point out the danger. So I think it's important for us to point that out whenever we talk about this research.
Well, I think in some of the more recent discussion on this, the opponents of this research have actually conceded, yes, there may be some value in this, but they tend to minimize that value. There's a subtext in many cases that this is purely of academic interest. This isn't going to help anybody.
Right.
And I think what's quite clear, Alan, is that it is not just only academic interest. Whenever you see people talking in NSABB from the pharmaceutical industry or from vaccine companies at the NAS meeting, albeit a small number of industrial scientists, but nevertheless they're making clear arguments as to why this knowledge is useful. But I think that has to be balanced with knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and the fact that sometimes whenever we do experiments, the outcomes are not immediately apparent and may well not be for quite some time down the line.
Exactly.
Right, there's that element of serendipity that we can't predict.
Right. But there's also, I think, a very practical issue here, which is the way these experiments have been defined in some cases is so broad that it encompasses a tremendous amount of ordinary vaccinology. I mean, I think of Louis Pasteur passaging rabies in rabbits. Well, that was a gain-of-function experiment to some extent, depending on your definition. And we've got all subsequent vaccine development, certainly that involves attenuated vaccines, involves directing evolution of a virus to change its activity in culture or in a novel host. And the Fouchier and Kawaoka papers, when I first finally got a copy of them and read them, what struck me most was this is how you make a vaccine. You passage something in a non-native host and you look for adaptation to that host, and it's going to potentially give you attenuation. So there's also that whole practical aspect that if you ban these types of techniques, yes, there's the issue that we're going to close off whole areas of basic research knowledge that we need. But in addition, we could potentially close off entire areas of vaccinology practice that are actively pursued today.
And that's what I used as an example to the NSABB with one virus, which whenever we're talking about the number of individuals who were dying of that infection globally, whenever it was brought into the lab and worked with safely, measles virus. And
yes.
That's a great example. At the time, we didn't know anything about the receptors. We had really weren't certain how the virus got into cells, but we knew that Enders knew that there needed to be a vaccine generated. And with our 2015 glasses on, what happened in that attenuation process whenever they took it from a human and grew it in inappropriate cells, chicken embryo fibroblasts? What happened was it adapted and it changed its receptor usage rather than just using the two known receptors which led it into immune cells and epithelial cells. The virus actually became pantropic. It can, the vaccine viruses can infect every single human cell which has a cell surface receptor on it, which is ubiquitously expressed. So if I turn that around and say, would you like to take that and test that in a primate, which is what they had to do, and also tested in small-scale clinical trials with our anti-gain of function or anti-altered transmission or infectivity or pathogenesis, you would say don't do that experiment because measles is actually far more infectious than flu. The R0 is anything up to 18. So looking back on it, you would never let anyone do that experiment of adaptation of the human virus to those chicken cells. But what has that vaccine done? It's got us to the point where not 7 or 8 million individuals are dying globally, but now it's 140,000. Still an awful lot for a vaccine preventable disease. But if there's any virus which is going to be eradicated after polio, it'll probably be measles. With that pantropic altered virus, which actually is a great gain of function example, but led to the generation of a really great vaccine if it's used.
Exactly.
So the opponents of this work would say, well, we are not trying to limit all gain of function. We're just trying to limit, influenza transmission studies. But the reality is you just don't know where that's going to lead. It could make the next vaccine or the next big discovery, right?
Yep.
And what we are saying is that giving examples of how similar work has been beneficial in the past in ways that weren't anticipated.
And again, if you think about measles virus, in no way would they have anticipated the fact that Mayo Clinic have a very active oncolytic virotherapy program. Did Roberto talk about that whenever he was on TWiV with you?
We talked about his paper, yeah.
These guys are taking all of that knowledge and all of that ability with that virus, and they're growing that vaccine virus up, and they're using it in a completely different way. And no person in the 1950s who brought measles in and attenuated would ever have imagined that that's what you could have done with it.
Yep.
And that speaks to what Kathy just said. You just don't know where it's going to go.
So are we running the risk of being the laughing stock of the virus research world outside of the United States? I mean, this only applies to us. It doesn't apply to anybody else. So,
well, and
people with NIH grants.
Someone like Ron Fouget, who has an NIH grant, he's in the Netherlands. He can't do his work.
Yeah, but if you have the MRC in London, for instance, I don't think that
they don't have to listen for sure.
They don't have to listen, so they're going to continue to work on this, and maybe they'll make the breakthroughs necessary to eliminate it, even or to drastically reduce it. And we'll end up with egg on our face.
I don't know if that's a good argument, but certainly the work will go on in other countries.
Yeah, so what good is stopping it here when it's not going to stop it everywhere?
I don't know the answer to that one. That's a political question, Dickson. And here on TWiV, we stay clear of politics.
Oh, I can see clearly.
Mark, just as an insertion, if somebody wants to listen to that TWiV about the measles virus oncolytic study, that was TWiV 298.
Great. Mark Lipsitch published a paper. Let's see, it was, October of 2014 in MBio. Can limited scientific value of potential pandemic pathogen experiments justify the risks? So he uses this word potential pandemic pathogen often, which is I think it's again inflammatory because that's not the intention of the work at all. Nevertheless, he just says, all these H5N1 studies were really not so useful and the data are not useful. And I think that is walking on a very slippery slope because he ignores actually the real value of the work, which was very different from what was anticipated. And Casadeval and Howard and Imperiale wrote a response to that, pointing out the values of the work and how many of them were unanticipated.
To be fair, I don't think Mark completely ignores it. It's a balance of what he considers the risks, and it's hard to speak for someone, but to ignore is probably strong. It gives a different amount of weight to it.
Well, I think a lot of the interesting results of the ferret transmission work had to do with low pH mediated fusion of the HA and its stability, and I don't think he ever addresses that. In my view, those are the most important outcomes of that work, and I don't think he addresses it because for someone who's not a virologist, I think it's really hard to understand in the context of the field. It's not all about surveillance and vaccines and antivirals, which is what he focuses on, but it's really about that. And we'll hear a bit more in a bit from Stacy Schultz-Cherry, who talks about the value of that in vaccine development. There was also another good article in MBio by Casadeval and Imperiale, Risk and Benefits of a Gain-of-Function Experiments with Pathogens of Pandemic Potential, such as influenza virus, a call for a science-based discussion. So this is a really nice summary of what we need to know, what information is missing, and a lot of which the opposition or those who wish to stop this kind of research haven't talked about. For example, if you make a virus that can transmit among ferrets, what does that really mean for people? We don't know. I mean, we don't know if it would. A lot of the assumption is that it would transmit among people, and a lot of the people at Cambridge Working Group feel that it would automatically transmit, but we actually do not know this. We do not know anything, and so how can you get that knowledge? So I like that paper very much because of that discussion.
And just to put a timestamp on it, that was published August 1st, 2014.
Okay. Right. Another paper in MBio that I really like, which was published in October of 2014, The Apocalypse as a Rhetorical Device in the Influenza Virus Gain-of-Function Debate. And this addresses the issue of using apocalyptic predictions. We're going to make a virus that's going to wipe out a third of the world and so forth. I want to just quote from this because I think it really makes it a good summary. The central nugget in the controversy is a disagreement on the risks and benefits of such experiments. Proponents of gain-of-function experiments emphasize potential gains in applied and basic science, while opponents focus on risk and a particular concern that such experiments could unleash an epidemic with untold suffering. Given that the controversy is based on a risk-benefit debate, that humans are notoriously bad at assessing risks and benefits, and that is illustrated by the problems with vaccine acceptance, people do not necessarily believe scientific information, it's difficult to see how we're going to resolve this issue. However, the stakes are enormous because they can influence the course of future research with beneficial or deleterious consequences for our ability to handle future infectious disease threats. And they end with the statement, rhetoric can win the day, but rhetoric never gave us a single medical advance.
And this really kind of touches on the fundamental problem with what's often called the precautionary principle, which is the kind of the backdrop for a lot of this discussion, whether people name it as such or not. But this notion that if you can't prove that something is has benefits that are going to outweigh its risks, then you shouldn't do it. Or framed more strongly, if something is risky, you shouldn't do it. And of course, you can never prove that something won't have bad outcomes if you haven't done it yet. So this is a principle that is a weak version of it is enshrined in certain laws about environmental analyses. A stronger version of it is often rolled out when opponents of a particular type of technology or research or what have you want a general purpose argument that can block it. The problem with it, of course, is that it doesn't weigh the risk of not acting.
Right.
And that's what we come to with this, is that the two sides have kind of staked this out, and now, there they are, and what is the risk of not doing this research versus what is the risk of doing it?
So on October 17th, the White House announced a moratorium on certain gain-of-function research that included influenza virus, SARS, and MERS coronaviruses. And this was actually a surprise to me. It was announced on a Friday afternoon, I guess, to minimize press coverage.
This was a surprise to everybody.
And to this day, I don't know who thought of this. I've made inquiries, but nobody knows and nobody admits. But Lipsitch wrote a response in, I think, MBio again, and this was in December. A moratorium on research intended to create novel potential pandemic pathogens. I think this title is absolutely unacceptably inflammatory. Intended to create novel potential pandemic pathogens. It's just absurd. He shouldn't have been allowed to publish that in MBio with that title. I guess it's an opinion.
There is already a global moratorium on research that is intended to create novel pandemic pathogens, and that's called the Biological and Toxin Warfare Convention. You can't do research on stuff that's supposed to kill people. You can't try to kill people with the viruses.
Right.
And again, this is back to what I was saying on the use of language, where we have to be really, really careful just to ensure that we are not... We may just about understand what that title means because we are following the debate. But you can see that unusual shift between... And this is one thing I'm not sure if you've ever talked about, but when that transition between biosecurity, which is where this sort of started... Yes. And this is it morphing into the bio safety issue.
Yes.
So you can see that there's a funny transition, and arguments sometimes take on a life of their own, and debates sometimes take on a life of its own. And I think in and around this time, you got that transition from, it's all about don't publish these papers because what other people may do in labs which are not Ron Foucher's lab or Yoshi Kawoka's lab. That was about security. This is now starting to dip its toe into the biosafety world.
It actually shifted very early on.
Did it?
It shifted before, right about the time that the original Kawoka and Foucher papers that set this off came out. And I think the reason it shifted was because there were several in-depth discussions and articles, and some of which even burbled up into fairly widespread media, about how ridiculously ineffective biological warfare has been throughout history. And if you look at the history of biological warfare, it's been a ridiculous failure. The Soviet Union, which was a global superpower and had hundreds of scientists assigned to this, managed to accomplish virtually nothing in improving on the pathogenesis of smallpox and anthrax. I mean, they weaponized the heck out of this stuff. And what they got at the end of it was really not very effective to use as a weapon, even if they had chosen to do so. And then you look at what terrorist organizations have tried to do, and the examples are even worse. Aum Shinrikyo actually released anthrax over downtown Tokyo, and nobody even knew about it.
Yeah.
So when that discussion shifted and became, there's really not a whole lot of public concern about bioweapons. That's not a very impressive threat. Terrorists are going to do a whole lot more damage with a little bit of flight training and some box cutters, right? You can kill 3,000 people that way. How many people are you going to... You kill nobody when you release anthrax over downtown. So this was not a credible threat. And I think that is when the debate shifted to, oh, well, okay, forget about the bioterrorism angle. What we're really worried about is accidental release.
Yeah. And then, of course, that's whenever, Vincent, we probably thought of it with Scientists for Science in a broader sense of working with dangerous pathogens, because then it comes into question, are the facilities that we have, are the measures that we have in place, are the IBC committees, are the people who review the work that we propose to do? Because remember, all of this work is reviewed before it's undertaken. Are they not sufficient to maintain a BSL-2 pathogen or a 3 pathogen or a 4 pathogen? That's where this debate has a wider impact on virology, microbiology, in my opinion. I mean, as a non-flu virologist, I can see it drifting in that direction. And then you have the law of unintended consequences, where you basically say, it's not safe, we can't keep these in containment. So what else can we not keep in containment if we don't believe that the engineering is sufficient to work?
Right. Right, and that brings in, and then you have also these recent news revelations about lapses at containment facilities, which certainly has not helped matters, because that's become, even though those are completely unrelated to this discussion, those did not occur at any of the labs that are involved in any of this research that was being discussed. They did occur, and they brought a lot of concern about that kind of tangential issue. And now it shifts to, oh, look how common accidents are.
Yeah.
Now, in this paper, which is by Lipsitch and Inglesby, a response to the moratorium, they also include a kind of a risk assessment. All right. And here it gets very difficult, because these are all hypothetical on the assumption that something created in the lab that got out would, in fact, kill people and transmit effectively among them. And the assumption is made that they would transmit as effectively as, say, seasonal or pandemic influenza, which is really wrong. And so they go through a series of calculations. For example, a simulation model of an accidental infection of a lab worker with a transmissible flu strain estimated at 10 to 20% risk that such an infection would escape control and spread widely. They take into account how flu spreads and how many people are in the world. Putting all these numbers together, a laboratory year of experimentation on virulent transmissible influenza virus might have a 0.01 to 0.1 chance of killing 2 million to 1.4 billion people, or an expected death toll of 2,000 to 1.4 million fatalities per BSL-3 laboratory year. And these go on, but the point is, when you make numbers like this and you write them down, people get scared. But the assumptions leading to them are faulty, because we don't know what kinds of properties these viruses would have. Now, in response to this paper, Ron Fouchier wrote an article which was just published today. Now, this is an article I referred to a couple of weeks ago. Ron had written a letter to me, and I quoted some of that letter in a previous TWiV, which I can't remember the number of offhand, just a few ago. And I wrote to Ron this week and I said, we want to include this in our discussion. And he said, it hasn't been published yet. But he wrote to MBio, and they published it this morning so that we could talk about it.
So we could talk about it on TWiV. We have pull.
I mean, this would never happen at any other journal than MBio. I think it's really a terrific thing that they did. So this is a paper that Ron Fouchier wrote called Studies on Influenza Virus Transmission Between Ferrets, the Public Health Risks Revisited. And he writes, it's basically a letter saying that the Inglesby and Lipsitch article really overestimates the possibility of a virus getting out and if it's transmitting and so forth. And he said they haven't taken into consideration the kinds of practices we put in place at RBSL 3 Plus in the Netherlands, for example, where we have lots of restrictions about what can be done. It's only limited to 10 people. They're all vaccinated against H5N1, for example, and they're way beyond the typical BSL-3 standards that you need. So he calculated the possibility of transmission as more like, what was it, 1 in a million years or something like that?
1 in a million.
1 in a million years. Now, I mean, I think this illustrates the difficulty in trying to calculate, right? Here you have Lipsitch way at the other end and this at the one end. In fact, we had a great letter from John. What was it on TWiV?
319 maybe?
Yeah, 319. John said, anybody who takes that seriously, 1 in a million, should read Richard Feynman's appendix to the Rogers Commission report on the loss of Challenger.
Or I'll sell them a ticket to a lottery.
He said that the NASA managers claimed a 1 in 100,000 chance of failure per shuttle launch, and it turned out to be 1 in 63. Reliability of complex systems is estimated by extrapolation. It's engineering, not math. That's the key, right? It's engineering, not math. So I don't think either Lipsitch or Ron can do the calculation because there's so many variables involved, right?
What I got from this in the original excerpt that we got, and what I get rereading it, is Ron's intent is to say, look, Lipsitch is taking very pessimistic assumptions,
right,
to generate numbers that he likes. If we take optimistic assumptions, which are equally legitimate, and he goes to some pains to explain the basis of his assumptions, we can come up with a very rosy number. So now we've proven that depending on our assumptions, we can come up with radically different numbers. Maybe we ought to have a more meaningful discussion than that.
Now,
and the thing is about it going backwards and forwards. So if we see these as the two extremes,
exactly.
Obviously, there's some land in the middle which is more like reality, because 1 in a million years seems a lot, and 1.4 billion individuals dying of something released from a laboratory accident also just seems to me excessive.
Neither seems credible.
Of course, neither seems credible. So what will happen? We will go backwards and forwards and say, well, this bit of it's not right, this bit of it's not right. And then it becomes a discussion which I'm not sure that it gets us anywhere. So I honestly think that Mark and Tom are being thoughtful in how they're looking at the data, as is Ron trying to counter how he looks at the data. So what this indicates to me as a non-flu virologist, not doing the work like Ron, or someone who has considered it the way Tom and Mark have, is that there must be some place in the middle where reality lives.
Now, as you might expect, Lipsitch has a response to Ron Fouché's letter, and that was published this morning also because it's only fair, right?
Yep.
And Lipsitch and Inglesby say that
they disagree.
And that Fouché's numbers are conceptually and statistically invalid, and that a lot of the assumptions that they made, and it's a very, very long letter, are incorrect. And I find it interesting because in Lipsitch's and Ingleby's original letter, they said, okay, I think everyone should read and challenge these numbers. So Fouché did, and now they're coming back and saying you're wrong. So if you invite someone to challenge, shouldn't you be more open-minded? There's nothing in this new letter which says that, yeah, you might be right on that or you might be right on that. It said, no, you're wrong in everything that you say. And that should raise a red flag to everyone, I think. So anyway, those are worth looking at as well. And we appreciate that we could at least talk about them briefly.
Yes.
Another relevant article by Imperiali and Casadeval, vagueness and costs of the pause on gain-of-function experiments. They talk about how pauses and moratoriums are blunt instruments and carry the potential for unintended consequences. And they realize that, people in government are trying to do the right thing. But they say, we note, however, that depending on which interruptions of work are counted, this is at least the third pause/moratorium in this field, with the first being voluntary, the second requested by the U.S. government, and the third being the current pause. We have numerous concerns with the third stoppage, including the timing of the announcement, the vagueness of wording, and the potential effects on the field of influenza virus.
And this thing has been a complete mess. This pause has, nobody knows what's covered. I mean, they've been trying to clarify left and right, but when it first came out, it was just massive confusion, and nobody knew if they could go to work in the morning.
Yeah, it's
so
a mess.
it was truly a blunt instrument. It shut down an enormous amount of very important research right at the start of flu season, which just, I think it was a really bad move.
And what I thought was interesting was, again, something that we had talked about whenever I said earlier on about the creep to other dangerous pathogens, rather than calling it PPP. It dragged in another community of not negative-stranded virologists, but positive-stranded virologists, all of the coronavirus people.
Yes.
And that was really quite interesting because, of course, they were pulled in, and this is going back to where you went with the vaccine work. They were brought in because they were taking those viruses and developing small animal models, for example.
Right.
And
which is what we want them to be doing.
Which is sort of what would be a good thing to do. So hearing that people were not able to develop a small animal model for mares in the middle of an outbreak and a virus spreading in a way that we don't really understand how and where and why, that is of concern to me. Because these types of experiments have been the basis of virology. If you don't understand the history of virology, you don't understand that those are experiments that could have been done in 1930 if MERS had been about and we knew what it was in 1930, 40, 50 or 60. These are not state-of-the-art experiments. They're the staple of testing antivirals, testing novel vaccines, developing challenge models. So that was a real concern. And then, of course, you end up very quickly with the backtracking. And again, you talked about people not maybe ready to give and change their mind. But it was very interesting at the NAS to listen to people like, for example, Tom Inglesby, who wrote a really nice summary of the meeting, indicating that it didn't make any sense whatsoever to have the coronavirus stuff bundled up with that.
So whose idea was that?
Whose idea was what? This is the difficult thing to know. Where did it come from?
I guess it doesn't matter. Yeah.
And it doesn't actually matter. The question is where we have to be very, very clear in what we do, and where policymakers and government need to listen to not just those two extremes of the argument, that let's just caricature it as Ron Fouché wants to do any experiment, and that of course is not the case. And Mark Lipsitch wants all flu transmission studies stopped, and not just flu transmission studies, but coronaviruses and anything which could be potentially pathogenic in people. So these extremes, we have to build some sort of consensus in the middle ground, and I think by reaching out and talking to people, that will be beneficial. So that has been a good example of something which people at least changed their minds after the NAS meeting, and those experiments are now able to go on. Is it a complete mess that it happened in the first instance? Yes. Will it hopefully make government be very thoughtful about what they want to ban next? Because I think we probably are collectively agreed that bans really don't work. Moratoria are not useful. They're very blunt instruments, and pauses just are funny.
Right.
I don't see why we couldn't. I mean, I am very happy to have a discussion, as many individuals are, but I don't understand why the research had to be stopped. There was no indication that something was going terribly wrong. Why couldn't we just have a discussion? This makes zero sense.
I agree. I do.
I mean, I can't speak to that because obviously nobody knows exactly where this policy came from. But my kind of guess at it when this happened was that it was probably related to all the headlines about laboratory accidents that my industry had become a little bit obsessed with, frankly. And there was a big stories on the next lab accident at the CDC were selling papers, and so those were the stories you were getting. And this probably started to become a bit of a political concern for the government in general and for the executive branch in particular, because they're supposed to be in charge of the CDC. And so somebody somewhere in authority made the decision that, hey, we ought to just put a pause on this to act like we're taking it seriously. Yeah. That's my guess. But as I say, we can't really know.
It's probably a good
see
guess.
The consequences of that, because that knee-jerk reaction and not looking at the data, and ultimately they should be driven by the data and the reality, not the extreme points of view. That gets them into a position where the next time they want to try and ban something, at least they may learn from that and not have a knee-jerk response, because it doesn't look good if you ban something 1 minute and then next minute is, okay, we've listened to people, we've changed our minds. That doesn't give the sense that there's a lot of thought having gone into that. And I'm sure there was thought, but how broad was the consensus? How many people were talked to? What drove that decision? To change your mind quickly is not good.
So what Paul's talking about is the fact that the restriction on the MERS experiments were reversed not too long ago, right?
Yes.
Right. So effectively the day after the 2-day meeting in Washington, the scientists, including Matt Freeman, got word from NIH that their request for waivers had been approved and their mouse experiments with MERS could continue. So that was middle of December.
Right.
There are 2 good papers in MBio more recently, one from Stacy Schultz-Cherry and another from Nancy Cox and her team.
And multiple authors on both
many
of
authors
those.
on both. Yes. And the Schultz-Cherry is about how the H5N1 transmission studies played a role in vaccine virus recommendations. And the other is, again, related to that surveillance, pandemic preparedness. And Nancy Cox's paper in particular that says this pause provided an opportune time to describe how the molecular markers identified by the controversial ferret transmission studies and many others have provided important information for public health risk assessment. And then we have a very nice paper by Duprex and Casadeval, Falling Down the Rabbit Hole, a Trip Toward Lexiconic Precision in the Gain of Function Debate. Maybe you could summarize that for us, Paul. I love it. I think it's a wonderful article.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things which probably those I've talked about the 2 extremes and again caricatured by Ron and Mark at those ends. That it's not personal. It's just let's just use them as an example. Of those 2 extremes. One of the things that those 2 extremes of opinion probably agree on is gain of function really isn't a very good term. That's one thing that everyone can get their minds around. And then the question is, well, it's okay saying it's not a good term. What should it be? and that's a difficult one because no virologist, I'm not sure if you asked a virologist 20 years ago would they ever have used that term or would have thought to have used that term. So what Arturo and I decided to do is at least put up a straw man and allow others to decide whether or not this is useful, and basically try to get to a position where we're describing the types of experiments that we're worried about. So gain, it doesn't have to be gain of function. Sometimes loss of function is equally concerning. Mm-hmm. So we tried to bundle it up into the phenotypes that we were interested in. So altered, right? Alterations cover gain and loss. Hence the A. Then T is easy because it's transmission, and of course everyone's so obsessed with transmission you really want to start there.
Very good.
R R covers the two sides of range, and that's cross-species infection, viruses which jump species, so bird, mammal, or whatever your favourite cross-species jump is, but also resistance, so resistance to known therapeutics like drugs or a monoclonal. So this would be developing escape mutants. I covers infection, so anything which enhances the infectivity or changes the infectivity, alters it, is something that we want to think about. And then P is pathogenesis. Now, this is an interesting one because if you talk about pathogenesis, pathogenesis is the process. The phenotype that you're looking at really is virulence. So that gets people into a little bit of a tiz as different virologists have a different take on that. If I had to divide it into groups, I would say older, more purist virologists than young whippersnappers who are molecular virologists are less tied to pathogenesis and are less tied to virulence. If you really like the term virulence, if you've been through virology for a longer time, but for the sake of putting something up that people could knock down, we decided to go with aTRIP, and of course we wrap it up with Humpty Dumpty, who really just uses terms indiscriminately and just decides to call things whatever he wishes to call them. And it links back to the terminology whenever it was suggested about using the term, well, what about gain of function of concern? And of course, if there was ever something that would be quite nice to use, but once you abbreviate that term, might not be the most useful term to use in polite conversation. Yeah, that's good, Kathy. That's the way to say it. But I think that sometimes you just have to look at it and see some of the humour in all of this, and just take a little back step. And it is serious, but you want to consider the funny side of things, and the funny side is really visible whenever you look at the NSABB meeting. I should really find out where it is and when that was suggested, but whenever gain of function of concern was observed, you just get to see this beautiful little ripple of laughter spread from the index case. It's like a transmission experiment. Gain of function of concern started at one index case and spread beautifully across the room, and it's videoed. And you can see quite a bit of smirking. So
this is during the NSABB
This is
meeting
during the NSABB. I'm sure, Vincent, you can find out where it is and post the exact time slot for people to save them having to wait through the 6 hours, 50 minutes of it.
So this is
my idea though was you should call it gain of pathogenesis, which would give you an even better abbreviation.
I remember the GOP being suggested by you, which was quickly ignored by people, because remember that this is an international question, Alan.
Yes, of course.
GOP doesn't really mean an awful lot outside this country.
Yeah. So you want aTRIP to be used, right?
No, I actually don't really mind. I think that if you look at someone who came to an experiment, right, ask the question, all of those phenotypes, it gets you to the phenotype. It's precise. It makes you think about what the phenotypes of concern are, and not many of those phenotypes are governed in any regular experiment that I would do. So I can think about altering the resistance. We're working with ribavirin at the minute, so I can think about looking at the resistance. But because I'm doing that with measles, is that really a problem in terms of release to the wider public and the pandemic apocalyptic threats that you've been talking about? No, of course it's not. So it's trying to get it into a bin where we actually think about the things that we're doing. And then we move forward and say, well, actually, do you know what? That could be of concern. Let me talk to a colleague. Let me deal with the IBC. Let me elevate this because that's what we do anyway. We're not operating as virologists in a vacuum. We do listen to what people say about the experiments we do. We have students who present at faculty meetings and faculty seminars, and that's that's where these checks and balances are in place. And again, we need to explain to the wider community, the public, why we want to do such experiments. I think that's a good thing to have to justify it. But again, we should be precise and say what we mean.
So, Paul, you were at the October 22nd NSABB meeting. You actually spoke at it. What was the purpose of this, and what was accomplished?
Well, the NSABB was really interesting for me because I was asked to speak before the pause was announced. And the pause was announced, as you have already said, on the Friday. And the meeting was due on the Tuesday. So I was putting together my talk, and I think you and I had a conversation about what to put in, what not to put in. You know, I practiced my talk with my TWiV mentor. It was like being a PhD student again. Anyway, I practiced my NSABB talk in front of Vincent via Skype, which is funny. And then they announced the pause, and I thought, wow, well, that is throwing someone under the bus. Because I was the first person to get up and speak and defend in the week that the United States government, and remember, I'm not even from this place.
How could we tell?
In the week that the government decided to ban it. So it was quite an interesting meeting. But you know what's really useful about it, and I think that again, it is really important to try and build some sort of consensus from the middle ground. It's nice to be able to sit at a meeting like that with someone who you disagree with. Sit right beside Mark, and we do disagree on certain things, but understanding the personalities and relating one-to-one with the individuals and seeing why they disagree and where they want to go and what they're worried about, I think that's really, really useful. So I found that very helpful at the NSABB. It was nice to get to know people who think differently, realize that, you know what, it's not personal. It never is personal. There are concerns, and we listen to concerns, and there are reasons why we want to do the work, and I think that people try to be open as well, and in my opinion are open and want to listen. So I really find that quite useful. Then it was Mark spoke the opposing idea of why working with the influenza transmission studies was risky in his opinion. And then basically there were probably about 12 other individuals. So you've already mentioned Stacey Schultz-Cherry, and Yoshi Kawoko was there, and they explained a little bit about the surveillance, and there was an opportunity for Yoshi Kawoko to explain about all of the measures in place in his facility in Wisconsin to mitigate the risk. And I think that's very helpful for people to see. And a wide range of individuals then were able to give short responses. So it was a good way to start the discussion. And rather than throw tweets at each other, which is in my opinion not particularly helpful, basically sit down in the room and in front of the NSABB, who really are very thoughtful about this, start that debate in the middle of the pause. So of course then other individuals, Kathy mentioned Matt Fryman already, he spoke, brought in the concerns of the coronavirus community, and then that basically set up the next discussion, which was at the National Academy of Sciences. That was just before Christmas.
And you went to that one, is that right?
I went to that. I wasn't asked. Luckily, I wasn't asked to do that. Kanta gave the initial talk, basically justifying, and this makes a lot of sense. I think it's not good to just have one person always defending the need to develop animal models of disease for flu or SARS or whatever. And Kanta has, of course, a lot of experience. She is involved in the influenza field and has been involved in the coronavirus field as well. So she spoke,
And her full name is Kanta Subarao.
Yeah, sorry, Kanta Subarao. So yeah, Kanta's down at NIH. So I think it's good because it probably was useful for me to do it in NSABB, and at the beginning I didn't want to do it because I thought, well, I'm not a flu person, and all of the arguments that I raised were countered with, yeah, but because you're not a flu person, then you don't have this vested interest in making the work happen, and that is true. I as Arturo often says, he doesn't have any skin in the game, and that's someone who's been, as you've said, through MBio, been very, very proactive in facilitating the debate. But we do all have skin in the game because, you know what, we're all microbiologists, and microbiology has done a huge amount for human health and animal health by developing great vaccines, and we have an obligation to defend the discipline whenever questions are being raised. So I think it's really interesting. I've met fun people, people who I would not have met ordinarily, and I'm sure the debate will continue. And I said to one of the media people after it, if it's a fight, no one's going to win, and I would love it never to be a fight, not personal, but very, very professional, and listen to each other and understand each other's points of view, and really try to get some sort of proper consensus. Which is why I don't like things like pauses or absolute dogmatism. These are experiments which never should be done. That's not where I would come from.
Well, I agree with you, and I think these meetings are great, but, you know, the Lipsitch and Wayne Hobson are using a particular kind of rhetoric, which is really disturbing. And I would agree with you that, yeah, it's great to sit down and talk with these individuals, but why do they have to do that? I mean, this, as was pointed out in this article on rhetoric, that can often win the day, and that's simply not appropriate, especially for science, I think. We got a letter after the National Academy meeting from one of our listeners, Sandra, and she wrote, I'm home today watching the National Academy Symposium on gain of function. Caught part of Yoshi Kawaoka's presentation. Was very impressed. The data cited his logical reasoning and how succinct he was on such a complex topic. He was followed by David Relman, whose argument seemed, to this layperson, very weak. One Relman comment really bothered me. Approximate quote, risk exists today and benefits must exist today, not in the future. He later distinguished between near future and indeterminate time in the future, but that still bothered me. Until discovering TWiV, I never understood how critical basic research can be. So I'm surprised that he would make a statement like that. Benefits must exist today. That is contrary to what a scientist does, and we all know that.
Yeah, I don't remember the precise quote, and of course, if that is what was said, you would have to ask the question whether or not that made sense. But remember as well that we're scientists, and we do try to watch every single word that we say, and we do try to be careful, but sometimes we say things and they do get, the meaning doesn't come across carefully. So again, in my consensus building world, I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, because these people are not unintelligent people. David Relman has contributed a significant amount to the scientific literature. So what I would try to do in that instance was understand precisely what he meant.
Yeah, I think it's just great that a non-scientist picked up on that. Yeah. It's very important because it's clear.
And again, Vincent, that's really, really important to realise, and that's where it comes back to, and then this really is a general point. This is where we have to be really, really careful. It's we shouldn't be using language which is ambiguous. Because that these are not conversations which are only within a small cohort of individuals in a closed room. These are conversations which are being listened to by people like Sandra, and we do not. We are not in a position where we should be confusing the general public and people who are genuinely interested in understanding what we do. It's our responsibility to be clear. So that's the flip side of what I said.
Paul, what's the So what's in the future for these? Are there going to be more NSABB or NAS meetings or some other kinds of meetings? How are the pauses for 1 year, and then a decision is going to be made, right? So what is happening in that year?
What's happening at the moment, as best as I understand it, is there are a few subcommittees have been convened within the NSABB. So, for example, a group's looking at the terminology, because that's something that at least people can rally behind, and whether it's aTRIP or whatever it turns out to be, something which is a little less ambiguous than gain of function. So there are a number of working groups. Then the other thing which is happening, and this is an interesting one, and I will watch this one carefully, because it probably costs quite a large amount of money, and B, because a number of people are already questioning whether or not it's feasible to perform it within 1 year, and that's the risk-benefit analysis. So the call for outside contractors, I think that would be the term, or outside companies, to be able to perform a risk-benefit analysis has gone out. I'm not sure where they are in that process, but they will have. That's a very, very aggressive timeline to get that risk-benefit analysis done. And again, let's just think about the two examples that we've talked about today, Ron's number and Mark's number. What's going to happen if one company comes out with a number which is in one direction and one in the other direction? That's going to be very, very difficult. Is that n equals 2? So do we have to multiply that experiment by another 3 companies, and how much will that cost? So I think that what I said at the very beginning, I don't like pauses, I simply disagree with moratoria, but at least it's only for 1 year. Let's just hope that I was right to say that, and that we don't go into some sort of drift, because that is completely unfair. And again, one of the things which was mentioned, and Julie Pfeiffer has done a really nice job on this with reaching out to a community which doesn't really get well represented in this. This is our postdoctoral and graduate student community.
Yes.
They are sort of lost in this debate, and you know what? It's their experiments, it's their careers, it's their papers, it's their presentations to their thesis committees that is on, off, paused, not paused. So I think we have to really be very, very careful about this as well. So that's another aspect of it that I think is we shouldn't lose sight of. And again, that's a community which is well listened to by TWiV, and I think we as more senior virologists and microbiologists need to be very, very supportive to our younger colleagues whose voices are maybe not heard so often in that debate.
So Julie reached out to 156 grad students and postdocs, and here's a quote from her paper. After learning more about the debate, that is the gain of function debate, 5% said that they were more likely to work on influenza, SARS, or MERS in the future. 28% said they were less likely to work on those viruses, and 51% said they were equally likely to work. An additional 16% said their opinion was unchanged because they were not planning to work on a virus in the future. Finally, for those interested in virology, 12% said that the debate and research pause have changed their future plans, research direction. 51% said their plans have not changed, and 37% said the debate and research pause have made them consider other factors. So I think this is a great idea because, yeah, they're the future. They're the ones who are going to be doing these experiments.
And I mean, and Julie's the first person to say that this is not scientific and it's survey monkey and it's. But you know what? Credit where credit's due. At least she has made the effort to reach out and try to get some sort of feeling for what's going on in that community. And I think that the great and the good within NAS and within NSABB should be cognizant of the fact that the community is bigger than just a small number of people who are speaking at that. We have a broad community and we have a responsibility to support the future of virology and the future of virology and microbiology is represented by this 156 individuals.
Yep. I also really appreciated Pfeiffer's transparency in this paper. She says, for full disclosure, I report that this survey was conceptualized and implemented over a 1-hour period on a Saturday while a beer was consumed. However, the results from this preliminary unofficial poll are worthy of discussion in future study.
Of course they are. Of course they are. And I think they will stimulate some more.
Yes, I think quite a lot of very useful experiments have been conceptualized and implemented over a beer.
Yeah. Last article I want to point out, it was just published in Scientific American by Mark Lipsitch. The title is Make the Pause on Risky Pathogen Research Permanent.
This is really unfortunate.
So here's someone who is sort of calling for a discussion, but now he says it should be permanent and we shouldn't have a discussion. So this is really bothersome. So for me, it just questions the whole motive on his part for doing this, and the lack of transparency. You know, he's not being honest with us if he says he wants debate. And, you know, I don't want to make it personal, Paul, as you say often, and I think that's true. But when people continue to publish more or less the same articles with titles like this, it's really disturbing.
And with text that's very misleading. You know,
Absolutely.
Researchers have been deliberately creating influenza viruses that are highly virulent and spread easily among humans.
Yeah, killing several percent or more of those infected.
Which is completely false, because nobody has deliberately created any such thing.
Absolutely. Yes, this is more of what I call misinformation and fear-mongering.
So I think this is a really, really unfortunate article that sets the debate back.
Any thoughts, Paul?
I really, again, in the same way as I said about trying to understand what David Relman said at that at the NAS meeting, want to pick through what really is said in that article. I'm not sure that Mark is saying anything different than what he has already said. The title is unfortunate because I'm not sure that it makes sense to take a position where you're saying people are thinking about it, there's a call for a deliberation, and then say, but you know what, this is the non-negotiable. So I think the title is rather unfortunate. Whether or not Mark had control over the title would be worth finding out. I'm not. Yeah, sure.
That's what I was just going to ask, because Alan has taught us that journalism doesn't always mean that, or journalists don't always get to pick the titles of their papers.
Yeah,
their articles.
So as best as I have been able, and without putting words into Mark's mouth, I think that we have to be again a little bit open and not say that it's dishonest or it's manipulative or whatever. I again try to just look at it from that perspective.
I do think that if his name is on the article, he had a fair amount of control over the actual text, though.
Yeah.
I have significant problems with this text.
Oh, okay, Alan, I can understand that, but again, you think about it how the world sees it. They probably see it as a tweet, and again, this is where Twitter's great, but we can't just be throwing tweets with the title "Make the Pause on Risky Pathogen Research Permanent" at each other. And basically assume that that's everything that the Cambridge Working Group or Mark wants to happen, that there's basically a line in the sand. Because, again, there's the evidence that with the MERS work and with the SARS work that there is flexibility there. So, right. Again, I would just urge not too much of a knee-jerk reaction on your part, or maybe even on Vincent's part to that.
Here's something interesting. At the bottom of the article, there's an italic sentence. This article was originally published with the title "Defusing a Biological Bomb,"
which is pretty bad in itself.
That's worse. So they may have actually toned it down.
Yeah.
I don't know if look.
As I say, I would hold Lipsitch to what is actually written in the article, which I don't think is constructive.
If I wrote an article and then someone put a different title from what I intended on it, I would make it known that this was not my intent, and I don't think he's done that. But I would like to hear, and I don't think Twitter is the place to do that. I agree, Paul. But at some point, if he didn't agree with this, if he still wants to have a discussion, he should make it known.
Well, as I say, I will take another really close read at it, but I'm not sure. I think that Mark is sufficiently concerned and is concerned about the experiments that there are certain experiments he just simply doesn't believe should be done. So maybe this is just a very, very clear way of saying something which has been not so clearly articulated in the past. And that's why whenever we read it, we think, oh my goodness, what's the point having a deliberation if you don't want to do it? And again, I try not to be too knee-jerky with it, but I listen to what you're saying, and I appreciate what Alan says. I can understand that aspect of it too.
I think, though, that what Mark Lipsitch wants and feels is not what all of virology should actually do. And I would guess that many of the people who signed the Cambridge Working Group would not agree to this statement of making the pause on research permanent. So here we have someone's personal opinion, and I understand.
And we try to dissect out that personal opinion of one article, one journalist, one spin that the journalist may or may not have taken on the discussion, alongside. I'm looking at that group of individuals. It's a broad enough church. Arturo has signed it, and Mike Imperiale has signed the statement. And again, there is a diversity of thought, I'm sure. So I have seen the personalities. I've tried to understand one-to-one, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt.
And we're really putting you in a tough spot here, so we should should let
it's not a tough. It's not a tough spot as well, because Mark is old enough, grown up, and clever enough to defend himself. He doesn't need me to defend him. Far from it. But again, I find my personal interactions, which I try to do, have those personal interactions really very, very comfortable and very, very informative, and that's the way I like to try and proceed in a debate. Understand where people are coming from, understand precisely what they mean by create, have a debate about the use of PPP, the term potential pandemic pathogens, which I would rather have one-to-one with Mark and other colleagues. So again, you sort of dance a line. It shouldn't be personal. We can disagree with each other, but we can be able to not make it personal.
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, but it just annoys me when
I'm not telling you
when statements like this are made. I would like to have him on TWiV, but I'm not sure that he would do it, or I could stay calm,
But then this is the Italian in you, Vincent Racaniello.
Well, I could bow out of that TWiV, and you guys could do it. It is partly, I agree. And
TWiV without Vincent Racaniello, how would that?
It would be fine. But I get very passionate about things.
And actually, do you know what? Being passionate about things is good, and listening to, being passionate about virology and wanting to defend our discipline. I make no apologies for the fact that we really, really have got behind the flu community, and I think it's really important because that's where it started, and a lot of people are caricaturing some virologists, and this does happen in Twitter by certain people. They're caricaturing virologists as a group of uncaring cowboys, if that's a term, and that really, I find that offensive as a virologist, that there's any assumption that I would like to endanger myself, the guys in my lab who, I really value them greatly, and I don't want to end up in Wikipedia as the person who led to a postdoc being injured or worse, and that's where I think it is really behoving on us to defend the discipline. And against what we think and what I believe are unsubstantiated attacks, if you want to turn it into the fight terminology, which again is not perfect. But yeah, we should speak up. And it should be more than just flu people and more than just MERS people. Broader community of individuals should be ready to speak up and say,
here we are.
This is what virology has always done, altering transmission, changing virulence to understand our enemies, which is really important. And remember what the enemy is this, it's the pathogens which are leading to
that's it.
People. It's not the people, it's the pathogens that we want to work with. And I trust the flu community. I hope that they are not held back from developing what we would always want to have, a universal flu vaccine. And as clever as they are, I'm not totally sure that they would know how to make a pandemic virus.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But maybe I shouldn't say that about our colleagues in the flu world.
Alan has to leave, so maybe.
So does Dickson.
Yeah, you want to leave right now? Well,
I don't want to leave right now, but he has to leave soon.
Oh, Dickson, you're silly. I want to have Alan give us his pick of the week so that he can go out.
So scrolling down to the bottom, we've got some good listener picks here too, but mine is a book that I just recently finished reading. It's a book that's been out for quite some time, and you've all probably read it already, but it's called In a Sunburned Country. It's by Bill Bryson.
I have not.
You should. You've even been to Australia. It's his travelogue in Australia. Cool. It takes place in the late 90s, I think. He made a series of trips there and traveled all over and writes about it. And Bryson is a blast. He's just a really fun writer, and he's in a really fun place. Cool. It's a really good read.
Alan Dove is at turbidplaque.com. You can also find him on Twitter. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
See you next time.
Hi, Alan.
Take care.
All right. Let us get back to our picks. Dickson, do you have a pick?
I sure do.
I know you sent it to me, but why don't you tell us what it is, Dickson?
I did. Actually, it's a series of extreme weather events photographed by a storm chaser who just happens to be a woman. And these are remarkable pictures of frightening consequences. She was witness to the initiation of tornadoes. And some of these photographs are just absolutely, you talk about apocalyptic.
I got it. Yeah.
Look at this first picture. Look at that first picture. You can put it up on the screen. I'm watching from here.
Put the link in so others can see it.
It's absolutely frightening.
Yeah, nice.
It looks like the gods are descending on this one place and they're just going to ruin everything in sight. And basically, that's what happens.
Minnesota.
It's crazy.
It's supercell, huh?
It's not just super. Look at how beautiful and yet
it's cool.
Wow.
They are remarkable pictures. That's all I can say.
Extreme weather.
Extreme
Yeah.
weather.
Nice.
It's a nice
Ooh,
set of pictures.
I like the electricity coming down.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, Dickson. Thank you for giving us a pick.
You're welcome.
Kathy, what do you have?
Oh, I lost my place. So a while back, I mentioned that I had heard that there was another all-female scientist Lego set, and I found the link. And at the time I found it, it still didn't have enough supporters to move forward. But in less than 2 months, it's passed the hurdle. It has 10,000 supporters.
Nice.
So it'll go under Lego review in May. And this is by the same one that designed the previous set. And so this one has an archaeologist, a wildlife biologist, and a geologist.
Cool.
So it's too late to vote for it, but you can just think good thoughts, and maybe when the Lego review board starts to consider it, they'll see the light and choose this set.
I like the accessories they have.
Yeah.
You know, all specific to the profession. It's great. I just watched the Lego movie. That was a blast.
Isn't that great?
Did you see it, Kathy?
3 times.
Oh, everything is awesome.
Everything is awesome.
It was so much fun. I mean, my kids have wanted me to see it. My 20-year-old kept, Dad, let's watch it. Come on. I said, I don't want to watch a Lego movie. It was so much fun, especially because the voices are actors that you know.
Yeah.
And all the cultural references.
It's great.
To other films and other stuff.
So they do that to get the adults to watch with their kids.
I really enjoyed it. The music was fun. But the cultural references are so much fun. Yeah. Did you see it, Paul?
I have not.
You have kids, right?
Like, yeah, but 17-year-old is not so interested in the Lego movies. So, no, I have not.
Okay, that's fine. We'll let you off the hook. Do you want to make a pick of anything you like, Paul?
So recently, I was just looking at the wildlife biologist, and I just came back from the Bronx Zoo. And this is back to something that I've talked about on TWiV before, the cross-species infection with canine distemper virus. Mm-hmm. And we were having a discussion about Siberian tigers and actually tigers in general, because of course these viruses are highly these animals are highly susceptible to the virus canine distemper. In fact, what's really interesting is, have you heard about the pandas are now infected with it as well? So there's a couple of pandas that died in China.
Yeah.
So in preparing for my presentation, which they asked me to give, which was called TWiV Vaccines Past, Present and Future, I found a paper from 2014 called Saving the Lives of Our Dogs, the Development of Canine Distemper Vaccine in Interwar Britain. And I have to say, it's a history of science paper, and it is absolutely fascinating why and how the TWiV vaccine was developed and what it led to. And this is a great example, back to what we talked about in the main section, the law of not knowing where things end up. What they did whenever they were developing the TWiV vaccine is they identified a very interesting laboratory animal which they bred. Can you guess which one it was?
I already guessed, so I'm not going to do it.
Kathy.
Sorry, I was paying attention to the telephone ringing.
So we're making the vaccine, and they wanted not to use dogs in England. They identified a very useful other species where they could make this vaccine.
This can't be the hedgehog.
No.
Something we talked about today.
We
talked about it today.
Ferrets?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
So this is what dogs.
So they started with ferrets, and you should just read it. You actually see a picture of the ferrets being used to develop the canine distemper virus vaccine in a place which was called Mill Hill. So
sure.
It's great, and unsurprisingly, after they had sorted out the canine distemper formalin fixed vaccine, guess what those ferrets and all of that knowledge was used to work on?
Flu.
Absolutely. So this is great. If you like history, and we should never forget history and where virology and where the discipline came from. And this is just a great read. So I would send you the link to this. Michael Bresselier and Michael War Boys.
Yeah, we found it. Kathy found it, yeah.
Great read.
Nice.
I enjoyed it.
Cool.
So there you go. That's me.
Thank you,
Paul,
Paul.
just as a point of information,
Yes.
was the Baker Institute at Cornell involved in this research also? I mean, I know they were founded because of some work in dog
It's
distemper.
really interesting. So at the meeting, of course, the Cornell people were co-sponsoring this meeting.
Right.
The marketing of the product was with the Wellcome Trust, and the American support. Quite a lot of support came from the Rockefeller Foundation, or whatever that would have been called. As well. So it's really, really interesting to see a problem with pathogens, and what drove the development of that vaccine was foxhounds. So the hunting. So they wanted to protect the dogs, and they needed to protect the dogs. How were they going to do it? They were just identifying viruses as the agents of distemper, and it's just a great historical perspective of virology.
Nice.
I can't
It's cool.
remember reading the Baker Institute, but maybe it's there.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Yep.
My pick of the week is a website called Despommier Photo Art.
Oh, God.
Yay!
Nice
Great.
Nice reaction.
that?
Nice reaction. Dickson. I just want everyone to see the kind of photography that Dickson does, DespommierPhotoArt.com, all one word.
Oh, shucks.
And I've been watching this for a while now, Dickson. I've looked
I know you have because you helped me construct this.
Yes, so I just think that people should see this cool stuff.
Oh, I'm touched.
So, you think I'm a schmo, huh?
No. I'm just...
What's this?
That's kelp.
I don't even remember putting this one up.
That's kelp. I took that picture when I went out to the Monterey Peninsula.
Huh. It's nice.
Thank you.
And then this one is with some jewelry on top of.
Yep.
What is that? I'm looking at that too.
Oh, it's funny.
It's a Bunsen burner that has some context to making this gold jewelry shine better.
Oh.
And I took that picture in India. This was a jeweler in India at a common market that you could walk in and look at people work. And I just thought it was an interesting picture.
Yeah, it is. It's cool.
Thank you.
Can't figure out what it is. But anyway, folks, take a look at Dickson's website. He takes nice photographs. They're all different sorts of categories. And
they're beautiful.
Well,
really
that's nice of you to say that.
So check that out. That's my pick of the week. We have 2 listener picks. One is from Jacob. He sends a link to a paper. He says, thought Alan might enjoy this one either as a pick of the week or a discussion paper. Exaggeration in news is strongly associated with exaggeration in press releases. Improving the accuracy of academic press releases could represent a key opportunity for reducing misleading health-related news. This is in a British medical journal. This is something we've talked about before. Alan has mentioned how it's the press release that really starts the problem. Because the universities are often very happy to push something, and often they go too far. Right. So that's cool. Check that out. That's from Jacob, who's in Sydney, Australia. And then Peter writes, Dear esteemed TWiX crews, I found the attached quartet game in the Museum for Natural History in Vienna, Austria. As you might know, a quartet consists of a series of always 4 thematically connected play cards. In this case, diseases caused by viruses, bacteria, and parasites. The info on the 32 cards are perfect for learning more about plagues and their causes while having fun by playing it with friends and or the family. E.g., you might say loudly, my virus has a size of 0.03 micrometers, polio, and with the agreement preliminary made, such as the player with the smallest virus wins, you'll beat, let's say, pox viruses because they have an average size of 0.35 microns. They really added all the latest threats that make you sick, HIV, dengue, influenza, H5N1, and for sure Ebola, as well as good old trichinella, schistosoma, salmonella, typhi, Yersinia pestis. We played several times in my biology classes at the secondary school where I am a teacher, and everybody enjoyed it. My best wishes to you for upcoming Christmas and a happy, healthy 2015 to you all. Keep up your excellent work. Greetings from Wiesbaden, Germany. P.S. One can also order the play directly, and he gives a website for that, of which I am not the owner. And he sent a bunch of...
he sent pictures of the cards.
Yeah.
They're really cool.
I'll be darned.
They're in German, of course, but here's Ebola.
We should probably get a set.
What else do we have here? We got parasites. There's
You have
trichinella.
too much time in your hand.
There's a polio one.
This is the perfect game to play after dinner.
Dixon, he did this for you because it's trichinella.
I'm touched again, doubly. I'm doubly blessed.
touched. How are you
doubly
gonna
touched?
There's a polio virus. Yeah, let's see what.
Kinderlähmung.
That's nice. That's
Yeah.
nice. I love it. Oh, there's all of them. Beautiful.
Wow.
I want a set of these. Right? Do you want a set, Kathy? You do
Sure.
too? Oh.
Measles is beside polio. See?
Yeah.
I definitely
Just
want a
look
set of these.
to the left.
I'd love a set.
Yep.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, it is. You're right.
Yep.
I just saw that. Yeah. It's called morbillorum, right?
Well, Misern.
Misern. I love it.
Destroying German.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to order some of these. PS. Vincent, your pronunciation of Kurzgesagt with 315.
Kurzgesagt?
Kurzgesagt was absolutely delicious. I don't know how I said it, but I guess I just messed it up. Kurzgesagt.
I will be in Germany. I will be in Germany in 2 weeks' time. I will source them in Hanover. How's about that as a present? And then when you come here next, I'll give you your pack of cards.
Well, buy a bunch. I'll reimburse you for all the TWiV team.
Sure.
Yeah,
take it as a gift.
Oh, have fun there. Well, that's it for TWiV 321. Hope you enjoyed that. You can find this and all the other episodes at TWiV.tv, also over on iTunes. And do send us your questions and comments. We'd love to get them at TWiV@TWiV.tv. Our special guest today was from Boston University, Paul Duprex. Thank you so much, Paul.
Great job. Very good as ever.
Always good to have you. And one day we will have you back to talk about morbilliviruses. I want to hear about canine distemper.
Yeah, me too.
TWiV is very, very interesting. It's worth a chat. And actually, with some of the wildlife people as well, to broaden it out, that discussion. Really very, very interesting.
Great. Good luck with the needle.
And you know what? You have to come back. If we open this year and if we have a seminar, I guess you have to come up with Threading the Needle 2 or Threading the Needle the Return. Or
definitely.
Opening. Will you come back?
I'd love to come back.
Paul, if you come down here, we'll take you for a couple over at Coogan's.
He was here this week, but he didn't come visit us.
It's an Irish establishment, as you might imagine.
Really? I would never have guessed.
Dickson Despommier is at DespommierPhotoArt.com. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome.
Kathy Spindler is at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This was a lot of fun.
And Alan Dove, of course, who has already left, is at turbidplaque.com. You can find him on Twitter. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.